Hi there, it's Dr. Jeanne Reames. And I am not in my usual spot in my office because it's a little too cold upstairs, so I am down on the couch. And I'm going to talk today about when Harry met Sally Macedonian style. In other words, we're going to talk about Olympias and Philip and how they came to be married, where they met, etc. And I'm going to preface it with a couple of bits of background to make it make sense. And by the way, if you see ears or tails, it's because I am being attended. I have a nice blanket, and you can see my research assistants here, Ceci, who's a little tuxedo, and then Cleopatra, the Siamese, named after not Cleopatra of Egypt, but Alexander's sister. So if you see waving tails and ears, that's who's hanging around here. So before we get started in how they met, let's back up and talk just a little bit about some of the bigger pieces to help make their meeting make sense. So first of all, we have Macedonian royal polygamy. Okay, that is, Macedonian kings married more than one wife for political reasons. Polygamy wasn't common in the rest of Macedonia. The average Macedonian, even the other companions in Hetyroi, are not marrying multiple women. This is something the king does. Most of the time it seems to have been two, maybe three wives. Philip had 7 wives. And we have a fragment left. Now remember, from our talks about sources, a fragment means a piece from another source, now lost, which has been embedded in a later piece. And so the fragment comes from a writer named Satyrus, and it's embedded in Athenaeus, and Athenaeus' separate party. And this fragment gives us Philip's 7 wives, kind of in order, but there's some confusion, some doubt about the order of the first 5. And I've talked about this before whenever I did the little piece on what Philip Wrought, talking about his first 5 to 7 years. And I mentioned that he married 5 women in quick succession. So I talk a little more there about it, but I just want to remind folks that the Macedonian kings do practice royal polygamy. And Olympias is either wife number 4 or number 5. And it kind of depends on how we parse those early first 5 marriages. And there's some, as I said, there's a little doubt about exactly what order they should go in. But he was apparently betrothed to her much earlier, before he was king. And we'll come back to that piece in just a minute. In addition to this, I need to mention some of Macedonia's northern neighbors, and specifically a group called the Illyrians. North of Macedon, you have several different groups that are non-Greeks. You have Thracians. We're not entirely sure who the Thracians are. Maybe Celts, some version of Celts, because there are also Celts up there. Maybe they're also related to Scythians, so there are Scythians further northeast. And then on the northwestern side, you have a group referred to as Illyrians. The Illyrians are not a nation, okay, like Macedon or like Epirus. The Illyrians are various tribal groups that periodically might be united under a strong leader and then aren't. The Agrianians, the Paiones also may be Illyrian tribes. So there's a bunch of groups up there, and just prior to Philip's reign, when there was some turmoil in the kingdom, and this King Amyntas, his father, was trying to deal with a particularly strong period under the Illyrians, or with the Illyrians, under a king named Bardellus. And Bardellus was able to unite the Illyrians and form a fairly formidable strike force. So they have been setting up there now for a while, kind of threatening not just the upper cantons that were originally independent, Lyncestis, Paeonia, or Pelagonia. Paeonia, as I said, might be an Illyrian group. Orestis, and also Epirus, which is where Olympias is from. So Epirus is to the west and kind of northwest of Macedon. It is a very mountainous area, a lot of Upper Macedonia. So the Molossians are the ruling family there, just like the Argeads are the ruling family down in Macedon. And the two ruling families of Eperos and of Macedon got together at some point, probably in the 360s, to form an alliance to keep Bardyllis and the Illyrians at bay. Okay. So that is the background, and that's what's going on. And then we get this tale here in Plutarch of the meeting of the Philip and Olympias, and he turns it not into a political story at all, but kind of into a quasi-love story. So very early in the life of Alexander, chapter 2, he gives Alexander's lineage, and he's explaining who his father's descended from on Heracles, and then his mother's side from Aeacus, who's the dad of Achilles. Okay. And then he goes on and says, we also hear that after Philip had been initiated on Samothrace to the mysteries, I'll come back to that in a minute, along with Olympias, he fell passionately in love with her. And although he was only a young adult and she an orphan, he went right ahead and betrothed himself to her once he had gained the consent of her brother Erebus. Okay, so that's Plutarch's version of it. There are a couple of issues there. One, Erebus wasn't her brother. That was a guy named another Alexander. Erebus was her uncle. Her father had died earlier. Her father's name was Neoptolemus. And the younger brother of Neoptolemus had stepped in and was now in charge of his two nieces and nephew. And Erebus promptly married the older sister Tros, and then makes this arrangement of marriage for Olympias. So he's making this arrangement, and Philip's not betrothing himself. Philip's brother is still alive, Perdiccas, and Perdiccas is the one who's making this arrangement. So this is what we're looking at here as kind of the background. There's a really great little chapter in this book, Macedonian Legacies, which Tim Howe and I edited some years back in honor of Jeanne Borza. And in it, we have a chapter by Bill Greenwalt, who, if I can find it, the title of it, it is Philip II and Olympias on Samothrace, a clue to Macedonian politics during the 360s. And this is a very reasonably priced book now. We have put it up basically at cost for production. So unlike a lot of academic books, it's not very expensive. There are some other really good articles in there. It's now 15 years old, but that remains an excellent introduction to what's really going on in this betrothal between Philip and Olympias, and some other politics as well in there, but he has good discussion of it there. And so this is an arrangement that's made when Philip is probably in his late teens, and Olympias is too young to get married at this point. She would still have been a girl. So she is not Philip's first wife. Once he came to the throne in this disastrous battle. So even though they made this alliance, Bardyllis still invaded, still attacked the Macedonians, and Perdiccas, this would have been Perdiccas Perdiccas III, I'm sorry. Perdiccas III, Philip's older brother, falls on the battlefield along with about half the Macedonian army. It's quite disastrous. Again, I talk about this in my video, What Philip Wrought, in his very early years on the throne. And so it's quite a mess. And Philip is then betrothed to Audata, probably, and then also marries Phila. So those were his first two wives. And we're not entirely sure of the order here. I'm betting Audata was wife number 1 and Phila was wife number 2, but it could very easily have gone the other way. And then he gets involved later in Thessaly and marries at least one Thessalian wife, and then possibly this Philina, the mother of Arrhidaeus. And then he either at the same time marries a second woman who will eventually become Thessaloniki's mother. So maybe they were married at the same time. And then Olympias, or he marries Olympias, and then he comes back and marries Thessaloniki's mother. So there's some uncertainty about the order of the women. But Olympias ends up eventually coming to Pella to be married once Philip is king, and to kind of buck up that alliance between these two kingdoms. So that's kind of how they met. Was it a love story? No. Okay. No, for one thing, she was a little girl. I don't know how old she was at that point. We'd have to know what date it was, and we don't know when this occurred. And this initiation was probably a cover for making this alliance. And again, we have Cleopatra going behind us, was a cover for the real negotiations going on. Samothrace was sacred to sailors. Macedon is not exactly a kingdom known for its navy. And even though it is in the north, Samothrace is an island in the north, it's really from Philip on that we start seeing much more interest in this particular mystery cult. And again, Bill talks about that in his article, so I recommend going there and taking a look at it. So that's how they met. And again, it's not really a love story. There may be reasons for depicting it that way in terms of how the Macedonians wanted to present the marriages that would produce heirs. My friend Borges and Tella Bernardez talks about that, and I probably just butchered Borges' name, but he talks about it in a brand new book, which again I highly recommend, called Alexander in Love. Just came out in 2024, and he talks about the importance of Aphrodite and of these stories of love in the marriages, or at least the connections that produce heirs. So there's a reason why this becomes a story, and why Plutarch picks up on it as a love story. But it's very much a political match. Now, let's fast forward a little bit and talk about Olympias at the court and Olympias and Philip. Because in a lot, and I mean a lot, of stuff that you will see on the internet, or stuff that you will read online, pop histories and other, these guys are presented as if they're constantly at loggerheads and they hated each other. And no, folks, no. They cooperated a great deal. Okay. Olympias is another uncle of Olympias, ends up coming in and overseeing Alexander's education, at least up until he goes to study under Aristotle. Her uncle's in charge of that, and all of the various tutors. He's the one that gets them and puts them together. And so Philip thought that she was quite qualified to indicate that he should do this. They also had cooperated at various other points. So there was not some great hatred between Philip and Olympias. That's later Hollywoodization of the story, and wanting to give Alexander this Oedipal complex, and pit him against his father. And no, the demonization of Olympias is a theme in Plutarch. And it's a very particular part of the story that we have Olympias and her snakes, and Philip and his wild drinking and all of it. They're barbarians. That's the story that Plutarch is trying to tell you. And then Alexander is going to be redeemed through true Greek paideia, Greek education, to be a good Greek leader until he goes into the East and is corrupted by Eastern Asian, not so much education there, but Eastern Asian ways. And it's just, it's a story. It's a trope that Plutarch is using to tell a larger tale about how great Greece is, etc. So no, Olympias and Philip were not at loggerheads, at least not most of the time, from what we can tell. Toward the end of Philip's life, he does marry the seventh wife, yet another Cleopatra. And at that point, there was some kind of issue, and we don't know what it is. When you read the stories leading up to this last marriage and then Philip's death later, the one thing you should walk away with is we ain't got even half the story. There is a lot more going on that we're not told about. Okay. And instead it's oversimplified, and I've seen modern writers treat it like Philip's going through some midlife crisis, who marries this young kid, who again he falls in love with. That's part of this story. And again, go read Borges' book on this. It's not like that. Okay. There's something else going on. And then there is a wedge driven, and Philip ends up marrying his daughter Cleopatra to Olympias's brother, this other Alexander of Epirus, to kind of heal that over, smooth things over. But they do seem to have cooperated at least as often as they may have fought over Alexander's raising. And if they are fighting, it's not jealousy, which is how Plutarch presents it. Okay, again, that's a trope. That's the way ancient authors give women internal, emotional reasons for doing things when the guys are doing the same thing, and oh no, it's for political reasons there. And this is part of the Greek biases about women that we find in the sources, and so you have to be aware of that. Olympias is not doing anything that her son and her husband are not doing themselves. Okay, it's just because she's a woman, that's unacceptable. Certainly women exercising power horrified Greek men, and so Olympias was very scary in that respect, as were Persian women, whereas in Persia women were expected to exercise authority and were looked at for advice. That was perfectly normal and acceptable in Achaemenid Persia, whereas again to the Greeks this is a horrible thing. So when we're reading the sources, we have to know a little bit of the biases that each of the sources are bringing in. So that's something to be aware of. Now, in terms of Olympias, as I said, I have some books. I showed you the one, Macedonian Legacy. If you want to know more about Olympias, this is the book you need. It is Beth Carney. She's been on here before to talk about other books of hers, and she did talk about Olympias a little bit. But this is a great book that deals with Olympias, including Olympias as queen. Or not queen, I'm sorry. Queen is not the right term. Wives of the king. We don't see Basilissa being used, queen, until later, until after Alexander. Up to that, they are wives of the king. Okay. Another one she did earlier about Macedonian women is this one, Women and Monarchy in Macedonia. It talks about more than just Olympia, so this is one of her first books. So those are some good books on them. And then, if you would like a couple of things on Philip, there are many more books on Philip, but I'm going to highlight two. One of them is now kind of old. It's Jack Ellis's Philip II and Macedonian Imperialism. And some of what's in here has now been kind of outdated, but I like this book in that it really talks about Philip the politician. And then more recent is Ed Anson's book, Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great. This is a textbook, so this is meant to be used as a textbook. And I like textbooks because they are written for the non-specialist to be able to read and understand. So there's a couple of 4 books for you on Olympias and on Philip if you'd like to find out a little bit more. And if you want to know specifically about what's going on with the betrothal, then Bill Greenwalt's chapter in this one, and then the original story comes out of Plutarch and his life of Alexander. So that's a little bit about how the two met and a little bit about their relationship and how they cooperated as much as competed in the raising of Alexander. So as I always say, if you like stuff here and you want more, please like and subscribe to the channel. And once it's not so cold, I'll go back upstairs and make videos in my office so we don't get interference from the fur babies.